Alright, with the updates, few month old updates now, since it's almost the end of August of 2019, and these updates were rolled out to the approvals connector in Microsoft Flow in springtime, sometime around April or May, I believe, and they showed up in our tenant, I believe it was late June or early July when I first saw them there. But at any rate, this is sort of the second generation of the flow approval connector. So all of the originally the approval connector had one action, which was start and wait for an approval, which started an approval and waited for someone to act on that approval before anything else in the flow could happen. This limited somewhat the functionality or the capabilities of it, because if you want to do something like send reminders, it was kind of convoluted and you couldn't necessarily send that person. Essentially, if you wanted to send a reminder that they have this approval waiting, you could all you could do was point them to the flow approval page, which incidentally is this page, and tell them to look for the approval and then click on it. But with the second generation, they actually split up the they split up the connector so that there is now there are two separate actions within the approval connector: one to create an approval and another to wait for that approval to complete. What this allows us to do, and in that create an approval, there are some additional outputs, including things like the ID of the approval and a response link. So now, rather than sending essentially you'll be able to send an email to them, a reminder email to the assignee of the flow, assignee of the approval rather, not just a link to the flow approvals page, but a link to that particular approval action. So it kind of minimizes the clicking on their part. You still can't resend the actual actionable message. So that original flow approval message that has the approve and reject buttons, you cannot resend that at this point. But I'm hoping down the road that they will incorporate that, or incorporate an email function that will allow, because essentially the approval, the actionable message is JSON code, which there's no good way, clean way that I found yet to put that into an email, an HTML or otherwise formatted email. But long story short, you can't send them the original approval actionable message again. You can send them a link directly to the approval item that they need to act on. And that's essentially what I did here. This is a very simple case. I set it up based on a SharePoint list. So if I go in and open this for editing, essentially for selected item, I have a sandbox site and a list called demo list, and this trigger, I added an input, which is the approver, where whoever runs the flow, starts the flow, can type in the name of the person to whom this approval should be assigned. So typically this isn't how you would do it, but you would have that approval, the approver dynamically assigned, whether it's the person's manager, but if it's someone other than their manager, this is certainly a valid way to do that. So just to walk you through what I've done here, this is for selected item in SharePoint trigger, with one input of approver added, and then I'm using a get item to essentially get the item for which this flow is being run. So basically, it's just go to the site address, there's the list name, and get the ID, which is the dynamic data from the for selected item value. And then what I need to do first is initialize a variable. This is a Boolean variable, which I called var approval complete. The idea being that when you start the flow, approval complete is going to be false. So the approval has not been completed. And as we'll see later, we're going to use a loop to essentially run as long as approval complete. If approval complete is false, it's going to run the actions and then run again, or do it until approval complete is set to true, which we'll see is set in another action. So then we have the create and approval, and again, this looks just like the create and send or create and wait. I'm sorry, the send and wait for an approval action, the previous version of it. So all the same things are here. The approval type can be everyone must approve, first to respond. The custom responses, we believe, are not licensed for these at this point, so pretend they're not there. But first to respond, basically everyone must approve means if it's assigned to 3 people and any one of them rejects it, then it is rejected. So in other words, everybody that responds must approve in order for this to be approved. First to respond means whoever responds first wins. So that's the one that's typically used if there are more than one approvers. And then I just gave it a title of test approval from username, and this is the trigger, the username of the person that started the flow and the timestamp at which it was started. And it's assigned to the approver, which is that input that I added to the trigger. That's all we really need to do there. Now this is where it gets interesting. Here is a do until loop, and basically this says do until the var approval complete is equal to true. So as long as var approval is equal to false, which is what we set it to initially, this loop will function or will process. And what's going to happen is it will delay, and just for testing purposes I set this to delay for 1 minute, but it could be 1 day, it could be 2 days, whatever interval you want to remind people at. That's entirely up to you and what your business requirements are. But essentially for testing purposes, 1 minute works really well because it can test very quickly. So that's just a delay, and then we have a condition. And the reason I have a condition here is that what I found is that while this delay is running, when the loop is running, if there was a situation where the reminder was sent even after the approval was complete and approval complete was set to true, this loop still evaluated one more time and sent that message again. So this is essentially saying, or catching that rare case where, because we're checking the approval, then we're waiting a minute. So it's checking, saying, okay, wait a minute, then check again. So it's just a double check. And what it's going to do is say if that is equal to false. So in other words, if var approval is still equal to false, meaning that it is not true, obviously not true would be false, then it will send a reminder message. Now in the reminder message, essentially I've set a let's go into code view so you can see what this actually looks like. And this is a little odd because it seems to have broken some of the code here. Let me just get rid of this. I'm not sure why that happened. But there we go. Yeah, it did some kind of strange wrapping of the... Oh, let me just add that title back in there. So if you know any HTML, this is a very basic, simple href or hyperlink tag. So basically we're using the respond link, which is the URL for that particular flow approval. and target equals underscore blank. Basically, it's going to open it in a new window. So if the person is viewing their email in the web version of Outlook, it's going to open that link in a new browser tab or a new window, depending on how they have things configured. But it's not going to take them away from Outlook, or it's not going to move them away from Outlook. And then as the text to appear, we're using the title of the approval. That's basically it. By the way, this is the send email notification v3 action. This is the one that sends from the generic Microsoft Power Apps and Flow service account. Kind of moved to using this as opposed to using the Outlook send email action because it doesn't send from any particular user's mailbox, and therefore when it's used in flows and apps, doesn't require that the users give permission to the flow or the app or give the flow or app permission to their Outlook mailbox. A number of people objected to that, so using this service account, the downside, of course, is that then it comes from this generic Microsoft Power Apps and Flow account, so can seem a little like spam. In fact, one of the things that I did incorporate here that I will show you is when you use this, because it's sending from that service account, it will include a unsubscribe link at the bottom, like to unsubscribe from this address, click here. And what I like to do is just add in basically a comment open tag without closing it, and that will prevent that footer from appearing in the message. At any rate, that's all you really need to know about that. But there is probably a way to do this without using the HTML code view. In other words, a way to include that respond link with the title as the text, but I didn't bother to figure that out. If you want to give it a try, go ahead. So that's the reminder email that's going to be sent. If I go up here and just collapse this and collapse this, now the wait for an approval basically takes the approval ID of that approval that was created, and when it finishes, when the approval completes, then we're going to set approval complete to true. So in ideal or typical scenario, the flow process creates the approval. This is going to generate that first email to the approver saying, someone's requested this, please approve or reject. If they act on it before whatever this delay is, let's say the delay is 5 days, if they act on it within the first 5 days, then this never triggers, and they, essentially this side of the fork would complete, marks that as true. This side would never be triggered and never run, so they never get a reminder. If they wait until day 6, on day 5, they would get this reminder message. They go in, click the link to go to the approval, complete it, and then the next time essentially this side would finish, any other actions you want to occur would have to go below this set variable side of the fork. So we kind of leave this do until out here on the left all by itself, knowing that at a certain point this is going to finish, or it's going to go through and evaluate and realize that approval complete is equal to false, and then this side will simply stop running. But because this is a parallel path, whatever is running over here will continue operating regardless of what happens on that side, as long as you don't include a terminate function, or terminate action, which we're not going to. So that's basically how it works. To show you in practice, let me just bring over, this is the SharePoint site, and I'm going to, actually just so I can show you the approval messages and all that and the reminder, I'm going to go into Outlook over here, and I'm going to go to my demo list, and I'm going to say test approval with reminder, set the approver to me, because it's good to be approving your own things. And then if I go over to Outlook, I'm going to see very quickly an email message from Microsoft Flow. And again, I can simply approve or reject this, but just to demonstrate that reminder function, I'm just going to sit here and wait for the next minute to see, so I can show you what that reminder message is going to look like and prove to you that it actually does work. So we'll wait for a minute here. Okay, and it's been a minute, so now I have that reminder message. Notice the original approval came in at 4:16. The reminder message, which I've simply have the subject as, hey, you have an approval waiting. Again, this can be whatever you'd like, but you'll see that there's the the link below to go to this approval and take action on it. There's my the approval title, and when I click on that, it's going to take me into the Microsoft Flow website, but notice that it's actually taking me directly to that particular approval, so that I can review it. I can look over the content of it, and I can say, yes, I'm going to approve this, and optionally leave a comment and click confirm, and it's done. So now, to show you what that actually, I didn't actually save those changes. That's why the email address, the email content didn't update appropriately. So now if I go in and look at that flow that's running, we'll see that we have green check marks on everything. And because the flow is complete, I have a green check mark over here. And again, any actions that I define under this set variable action are going to continue operating. This do until has been running for 3 minutes, because there was the initial minute, there was the second minute when it sent the reminder, and then this is in minute 3. So this is going to continue processing until the next time it comes around. It's going to detect that that variable is now false, and that's complete. If I expand this, we'll see, I can look at, there's the first time it basically delayed, sent the email. Second time delayed, sent the email. Third time delayed and did not send the email because the condition evaluated to false, so it did not send the reminder email. So again, this looks more complicated than it really is, but generally the idea is, and the benefit now of having the separate create approval and wait for approval components gives us much more flexibility in how these approvals are handled by Microsoft Flow or in Microsoft Flow. So essentially we now have the tools to create an approval, add in loop to send a reminder email with an actual link directly to that one particular approval item, as opposed to the approval page in general. And then when that approval is completed in this branch, it's going to set the variable which will prevent that reminder from being sent again. So hopefully this helps you if you've been looking at approvals and thinking about ways to use approvals, and in particular wanting to remind people of approvals, because it's great that approvals work as quickly and easily as they do, but that doesn't necessarily help when people don't act on them. And because there is still the overall 30-day time limit for a Microsoft Flow run to complete, it is kind of important to remind folks that they have this thing waiting, because otherwise If they don't act on it, then after 30 days, the flow itself times out. The approval will still be sitting there, but when they act on the approval, because the flow that it's connected to or that generated it is no longer running, any subsequent actions that should have taken place after they completed it don't. Um, I still haven't figured out how to handle that one, handle those particular situations where you want to allow people to take more than 30 days to complete an approval. So ideally, you can just create the approval and leave it at that. But what I'm trying to find is a way to essentially pick up that approval, or when that item is, when the approval is completed, it does something. And that's what I'm not quite sure of. So hopefully I'll figure that out. But for the time being, this should help you, or at least be an interesting project for you to try out.